Thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to present again. So this is, as you said, joint work with Rod Garrett. And it's a paper about, well, it's not necessarily DeFi, but it has components and applications that are certainly interested to decentralized finance. And I will point you to these while I'm going through the talk. Okay, so let me push the bar to the side. Okay, so the motivation of why do we look at optimal data security in an economic context is simply, well, we observe a lot of companies that are generating revenue with data. Yeah, so Google, Apple, Meta, etc. Are just a few to name. Yeah, so data has been called the new gold. It's valuable. You can make money with it, and a lot of it. Now, as soon as you're making money with something, you're attracting potential attackers. In the case of data, where it's all about stealing data, stealing access to data, and one of the probably very famous data breaches has become the Equifax data breach, where more than 147 million customer accounts were hacked, stolen social security numbers, etc., with a dramatic impact for the customers that were concerned. And now, on the one hand, you have valuable data, but valuable data attract attackers. This should give an incentive for these companies to protect their data very carefully. However, there has been a report in 2017 by IBS Intelligence stating that up to 65% of US banks are extremely vulnerable to cyber attacks. Yeah, and we read about cyber attacks again and again in newspapers, etc. And so it's a very common phenomenon, and it's also a form of an attack where it's not only the bank itself that suffers from the attack, but in particular the customers. And in some way, the customers rely on the bank, the institution, to protect their data. But well, does the entity do so? We in an optimal way? We don't really know. Okay, now when you try to think about data security, there are different dimensions that come to your mind. Yeah. First of all, one way to secure your data is certainly by generating backups. Yeah, we all know that. Making security backup of your I don't know, data, your research papers, and so on. And we call this redundancy. And redundancy is known in computer science or data security to be one way to give more security, at first, at least. So redundancy on the one hand. On the other hand, we have segmentation. And what we mean by segmentation is how much data do actually different entities observe? Yeah, is it optimal to have a large entity observing everything, or is it better to compartmentalize information and data and have multiple entities observe different pieces of data? Okay. Now, how are these two different dimensions relevant to economics? Well, with redundancy plays a huge role. For instance, when you think about Bitcoin, the idea of Bitcoin is, as you have a lot of miners, every miner having a perfect copy of the ledger, you create censorship resistance. Yeah, and it's because if you attack one miner, you essentially only attack the copy of that particular miner. And you have a lot of other miners out there that have their perfect copies. So essentially, there's no way to really harm the ledger if you have a lot of miners. That's the idea. A lot of redundancy is supposedly gives you more security. Yeah, but where's the flip side? Well, the flip side is if you have more redundancy, you also have more points of attack. Okay, and that's an issue when it comes to protecting privacy. Another issue when you have a lot of different copies or backups is if you have different entities, each providing a perfect backup, it creates free riding incentives. Yeah, I can free ride on you protecting your data optimally. We observe the same kind of data. And if you protect your data optimally, why should I protect my own data optimally? If I get hacked, I just ask you to provide your backup to me. Yeah, and so this is where the paper comes in with the economics. If you have entities that need to decide how to protect their data, there will be free riding issues. Okay. Now for segmentation, similarly, typically you will think the more data I observe, the more valuable the data to me, the more revenue I can generate. So it's worthwhile protecting it more. But it turns out that segmentation alone is not the dimension, but redundancy matters as well. So these two interplay with one another, and I will show you exactly how this is the case. So the paper analyzes this carefully. Okay, so the idea of the paper is to contrast the economics of different what we call information systems against one another. So we will look at how information is observed in the economy by different entities, how many entities observe the same kind of information, and how much information is observed by each entity, and so on, and how is this going to affect optimal investment in data security. Now, this is essentially a very abstract framework, but it's very widely applicable, and we later on are going to apply it to a setting, and particularly to the question where we think about, well, currently we're debating about introducing central bank digital currency. If the entire financial risk systems runs on a central bank digital currency, you would essentially create a huge entity, the central bank, that observes all kinds of payment data, an all-knowledgeable institution, observing a huge amount of data, making it an extremely interesting target for an attack. Not only that, but on the other hand, if you have one large institution observing all kinds of data, including my own, then why should I protect my own data optimally, given that the central bank can do that for me at their expense? So this is one question that we think about. Another application that you can think of is Bitcoin. So the idea that you have these decentralized entities, each protecting its own ledger perfectly. Does this actually maximize overall security of the system? When these agents are economic in the sense that they can choose to free ride. Okay. So what we basically do, we provide an economic model where entities have incentives to costly protect their data, but they also internalize the number of other entities that observe their data. They serve as a free backup, and I can free ride on them. And so the overall question is, can additionally provide a redundancy backups that used to be the idea of creating more security. Can this actually backfire because economic incentives to free ride are too large? So that's the question that we analyze here.
Can we interrupt with a question?
Sure.
So going back a couple of slides, I'm trying to understand your definition of security. It's kind of strange. So
I'm not there yet. I haven't told you yet what security means. I haven't introduced the model.
But you have made some statements on this slide that are already pretty bizarre. So before we lose you, I wanted to ask some questions. So the redundancy presented by public networks like Bitcoin is not meant to enhance the security of data. It's meant to enhance the resilience of the system to being shut down, to being censored, to having benign failures and have enough redundancy. It is a known principle in security that by making more copies of the data, you decrease the security.
Exactly, that's what I just
said. Trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
But you also argued that somebody might try to free ride on others to enhance the security, to rely them on the security, and that's also somewhat ridiculous because the security of the system is only as secure as its weakest links. I cannot free ride on anybody. I cannot rely on anybody if I'm exposed. So some of the foundations that you're laying out already at the beginning of this talk seem almost upside down. They seem kind of the opposite of what they should be.
Yes, so let me clarify. What we mean with an attack later on will be to manage to steal the data or to compromise the data. Now, if you create more backups, it's getting more tricky to essentially destroy all data, yeah, because there are simply more backups out there that you would need to attack, yeah. So as you create more redundancy, destroying the entire data gets more tricky or more expensive to the attacker. On the other hand, however, we will allow every entity to choose its investment in security. And investment in security will reduce the chance of an attack. And as you reduce the chance of an attack, yeah, you're reducing the overall probability that a piece of information is destroyed. Okay. So if you're increasing redundancy in computer science, the idea is increased redundancy gives you more security. Now, the economic flip side to that is as you increase redundancy.
Not data security. Sorry to interrupt, but increasing redundancy does not increase your data privacy unless you're employing techniques like secret sharing.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to argue. Exactly.
But that has never been the case. Nobody argues that redundancy increases security. It increases availability and increases fault tolerance. It decentralizes control. It has never been argued that it increases data security. You increase data security on public networks like Bitcoin by using anonymized addresses, which we know is quite limited, by forming two-tier solutions where agents preserve your privacy and act on your behalf. There are other ways in which you increase privacy and also security, but not through redundancy. That is never argued.
Okay, then we are aligned.
Okay.
Okay. So let me introduce to you the model.
Yeah,
okay.
I think we have a question in the Q&A, but maybe you kind of go over it.
Would you mind reading?
So Danny asked if we can think about data being destroyed or data being compromised moving forward. I think he meant for like the aspect of the security, that if you have a copy, so if one of your copies is destroyed, if you have another additional copy, so you can use the additional copy and not worry. So maybe this is kind of go to the discussion with Dalia about that. It's kind of can secure you that you're going to have the data.
Yes. So let me introduce to you the model.
And let's go.
In the model, there is our definition of what we mean with an attack. Okay. So then everything becomes clearer, and also what Dalia said. Okay. So here's our model of information of an information system, an economic model, I should say. We see capital I denotes all data that is out there. Yeah, and so this is a huge set. Now, this is also a finance paper, therefore, in the context of the talk today, think of I as transaction data, yeah, payment data. Now, information I is observed by multiple entities jointly. And I should say, first, so these entities, the set of entities we call N. Now, keep in mind that these entities do not necessarily all observe the full information, okay, but rather a part of it. But think of these entities that observe the data as financial intermediaries, miners, the central bank, etc. Okay, yeah, so each entity observes a subset of the full data set, yeah, and you can think of the full data set as a ledger in case of Bitcoin. But we're not only talking about Bitcoin, therefore it's better to think about I as simply transaction data or a proportion of transaction data that is observed by a particular entity, but not observing everything. Okay. Now, one important assumption is we assume that the specific data that is observed by an entity is exogenous to the entity. Yeah, and so this means that, and I'm saying that because there are other economic models out there that are about agents investing in information acquisition. Yeah, and so this is not about it. It's rather that this is a bank that has, or a set of banks that have customers, and these customers are given to the bank, and these customers are transacting with one another, and as they are transacting, they are generating data, I lowercase I, which is visible by the bank. Okay. Okay. Now, an important assumption is, of course, every piece of data out there, so in the total data set, is observed by at least one entity. And this means that if I aggregate information across all entities, then I will have a perfect knowledge of all data that is out there. I think that makes sense, right? So every piece of information is observed by at least one entity out there. And just in case, if you have a math background, you can think of these sets here as forming a topological cover of the full information set. Okay, so jointly, and so this is interesting. It's important because it means that if you bring together all entities out there, they can perfectly essentially, you can create all the data out there if these entities were willing to cooperate and share their data with one another. Okay, so here comes our definition of redundancy. Redundancy in our context means that there are entities that observe the same data. Yeah, it doesn't mean that they have perfectly overlapping information sets. It rather means that if you intersect the information set of entity I and entity J, yeah, so you have two different kinds of banks, it means that these banks mutually observe some of their data. Okay, and the best way to think about it is I'm a bank, Nir is a bank, and Dalia is a bank. And now I have customers that are transacting with Nir's customers, and this means, or Dalia has customers that are transacting with Nir's customers, and therefore Dalia and Nir, your customers jointly make transactions that are observed by both of you. Okay. However, not all of Nir's customers are transacting with Dalia's customers. Some of Nir's customers are also transacting with with me, or customers of mine, and therefore some of the information that I observe is not observed by Dalia. Okay. So does it make sense? And redundancy just means that essentially in the end, and so this is the important concept that we use in the paper, the concept of a cover. My information that I observe, if it is possible to recover the information that I observe by building, having other entities come together and throwing their information together, yeah. If some other entities exist that observe the exact data that I observe, we will call this the cover of my data I. Okay. What this essentially means is, if I get hacked and I lose access to my data, then when I'm lucky and I'm asking other entities to provide their backup to me, it's possible to fully recover my data using the information of other entities. Yeah, I repeat that.
Sorry,
yes?
Is it a case that everyone knows what other informations are known to others?
Yes. Okay, so we make the assumption that every institution knows its own information, of course, perfectly. But I observe what information Nir observes, Dalia observes, and you observe, right? So I don't know the content of your information. I just know, you could think of it what area of data you are knowledgeable about. I don't know the content of that data, but I know that this chunk of data is something that you know about. So I could contact you technically and ask you for access. Okay, so let me repeat this concept because it's really so crucial. We say a cover of information of entity I is the following. If I gets attacked, it is possible to fully recover I's data using other entities that do not include I. Okay, so it means there are other entities out there that jointly observe everything that I deserve, everything that I observe. And therefore, if I get attacked and therefore, if I lose the access to my data, I can ask those other entities to provide this lost data to me and I can recover it. Yeah, and we will make the assumption that I can recover it at zero cost. That's, of course, a strong assumption. Important is that because there is a cover of my information out there, it is possible to recover that information. Okay, now important is this concept here is different from privacy because, of course, if I get hacked, privacy to my customers is lost. But here, the idea of an attack is about me regaining access to my data. Okay.
So can I ask a question? So just to clarify, so basically here, if we have these three banks, my bank, your banks, and Dahlia Bank, and I, let's say, have no access to the transaction data and I want to recover that. So basically, I can only recover transactions of users that trade between banks, but unfortunately, traders that trade within my bank, I have no access, right?
Correct. Yes, that's right. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. I think one good example is, let me show you the picture here. This would exactly mean, if you look at this wall here, indicating all information that is out there. And here you have entity A observing this chunk of information. And here you have entities B and C. They observe the other amount of data that is out there. And B and C mutually serve as a backup. So if B gets attacked and loses access to its data, it can approach C to regain access. Yeah, but this is not the case for A, because there are no transactions from A to B or A to C, just from A to A, and therefore there is no backup out there or no other entity out there that could help A in case of an attack. Yeah, and so this is important. It's important A is going to know in this kind of model that there is no other entity out there that could serve as a backup. And therefore, in an economic context, A will behave very differently from B and C. Because B and C, because they know that they can serve as a backup, they will free ride on one another. Whereas for A, there is no backup, there's no possibility of free riding. Okay, so this is just to give a little bit more intuition. All right. Okay, so now coming back to the idea, information is valuable to each entity. And this means that entities generate revenue using data. We make the assumption that revenue only depends on the quantity of data and not on the particular, I wouldn't want to call it quality. We essentially make a symmetry assumption here that, again, revenue only depends on the quantity of information, and there is not a part of the information set that's more valuable than another part. And that's it's a simplifying assumption. Okay. Now, important is that an entity can only run revenue if the data is not compromised. Yeah. And now the term compromised, I will come back to in a moment, because if I gets attacked, I's data is not necessarily compromised if it can recover it through another institution. All right. So before I talk about when data is compromised, let me talk about attacks. Okay, so an attack on an entity I, we model this essentially the following way. We just say there is an attack function alpha, yeah, alpha is the probability of an attack. The alpha function is exogenous, but it depends on I's investment in data security. And investment in data security is a choice variable. So essentially, that means by choosing my level of data security, I choose the attack probability on myself. If I invest more, I reduce the chance of an attack. If I reduce less, chance of an attack goes up. Okay. Now, when is my data compromised? My data is compromised if every cover of my information is successfully simultaneously attacked. Now, in the picture that I've shown you here, A's data is compromised if A gets attacked. B's data is compromised if B gets attacked and C. Okay, because they mutually serve as a backup. If only B gets attacked, B's data is not compromised because it is going to recover its data via C.
So in your definition, security is integrity and availability. It has nothing to do with privacy. It has nothing to do with confidentiality.
Integrity and
availability.
I
So an
don't know.
attack is an attack on the integrity of the data that I store, or on its availability. So my availability to read the data back. It's not an attack on privacy. I would not call it security, by the way. This is an overloaded term, but just to clarify, you're not talking about privacy. You're not talking about confidentiality. Your introduction indicated that information is valuable, it may be monetized, and you wanted to guard the confidentiality of information against an attacker. But here, the attacks that you're describing is on the data integrity and availability.
Okay, I think I agree with that.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to say that Daria, because we also have these issues that in economics, sometimes we have different ways to think about some terms like security than computer science. So just have it in mind, okay? We use different definitions.
Yeah, no. So we need to bridge that gap, but this is beyond terminology. The introductory slides, the motivation was the fact that information is valuable and you want to guard it against being disclosed, against being monetized, against
No. So it's not against being monetized. It's the idea is because you can monetize data, there should be an incentive to protect it, to protect the accuracy of the data. It's correct that I mentioned privacy because attacks also have, of course, privacy implications, but privacy is not the concern of the paper. That is right. Now, confidentiality is also not the concern because the idea is that I can recover my data through another entity. But I mean,
the first bullet of your attack mentioned stealing information.
It's yes, this is one aspect, but it also means blocking information. If I cannot access.
Okay, so right now in your more formal model, this aspect, stealing information, is completely not covered.
No, it's not going to be covered, exactly. Stealing of information, it's covered indirectly because as soon as you attack one entity, you can steal information. And now as you increase redundancy, you increase the points of attack. Exactly what I mentioned, okay? But this is a privacy aspect. Now, blocking information is essentially harming the institution because if there's no backup out there and access is blocked, we say that the company can no longer generate revenue. Yeah, and so this is coming in here saying that the revenue, if the data is compromised, which means that I get attacked and all backups or all redundancies get attacked successfully, then I can no longer run revenue as a company, and this is going to hurt my business model. Yeah, and so this is the idea that an institution should have an incentive to protect its data On the other hand, there is anecdotal evidence that they don't do so. And we tried to model why that is the case. Okay. And I'm happy to answer more questions as I go along. Okay. Now, where was I? Okay. So my data is compromised as a company if not only I get attacked, but additionally all other entities that observe my information get successfully attacked as well, because then I cannot recover my data. Okay, I can no longer generate revenue. And we make the simplifying assumption that if I get attacked, but one of my covers is was not attacked, is fully functional, so that the data can be recovered, then I can do so at zero cost. And of course, you could say, you know, why should another entity provide my data back to me at zero cost? This is something that you can talk about. What's simply a simplifying assumption, and the economics are sufficiently interesting even without that assumption, I believe. Okay, so let me continue through the model. I'm a little bit short in time here. So how do entities reduce the chance of an attack? Well, you can invest in data security. Data security investment is, however, costly. It's going to reduce revenue. Yeah, for every unit of data security that I choose, it's going to reduce revenue by the constant Fi. Okay, now we also assume that, remember now, as I'm choosing my level of data security, I will reduce the chance of an attack on myself. Yeah, and we will make a couple of assumptions on this attack function here, on the probability of an attack. We will assume that, of course, this should be a function that decreases in my level of investment in security. Yeah, so alpha is a decreasing function. It's also a convex function. That's important because that essentially means that if I invest a little bit in security, the chance of an attack drops fast. But as I invest more and more and more, the attack probability doesn't drop as quickly anymore. Okay. We also make the assumption that if I invest nothing, I'll be attacked for sure. And if I invest infinite amounts, I will not be attacked. Yeah. And so these assumptions come into play later. We make another assumption here. This looks very technical. Essentially, it means that a tiny investment of data security needs to reduce the chance of an attack sufficiently fast. And that's an important assumption because otherwise you later on have equilibria where institutions do not invest at all. Yeah, so essentially this means the shape of the attack function here is absolutely crucial for optimal levels of data security. So depending on what you choose here for an attack probability, the results can vary quite a bit. And I will tell you how. Okay. Just to
just to clarify, so it's mean that like it's it's diminishing. So like the more security you want, it's more become costly and costly to.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. So now the entities, remember, they jointly observe that information. What do they actually maximize? Well, we say that these are financial firms, they maximize revenue. And what is revenue? Well, these are firms that make revenue with data, but only if their data is not compromised. So they make revenue if their data is not compromised, and we have to subtract the level of investment in data security. Okay, and this is a one-shot game, so there's just one time period. Okay, now let me tell you up front that depending on how information is observed in the economy, the likelihood of data being compromised looks very differently. Yeah, and I hope I show you a couple of interesting cases. Okay, now a couple of examples for demonstration. Imagine all data out there, all payment data is run via a central bank digital currency. There's a central bank that provides the CBDC, and the central bank is the only company out there that observes all data. So very extreme case. Then you have one single entity observing everything. You don't have a single backup. Okay. How about Bitcoin? Well, the idea about Bitcoin is, remember, every miner has a copy of the perfect ledger, essentially. Yeah. Now, in the case, and so this means that every miner observes the full data set. Now, in the special case where you have only 2 Bitcoin miners, and of course you have many more, you have the miners mutually serve as a backup. Yeah. So if A gets hacked, data can be recovered via B and vice versa. Yeah. And you have many more miners. Important here is, well, they both observe the full data set, but you have different numbers of copies. We already talked about the example here. These 2 mutually serve as a backup, but A has no backup because A's data is only observed by one entity. Now, this example here is what we are analyzing very thoroughly in the paper. Let's have a look at this example. We have 3 entities here, 3 banks, A, B, and C. Each bank observes exactly 2/3 of the data. So A observes this chunk, B observes the chunk here, C observes this chunk. There's exactly, for every piece of information, there are exactly 2 covers. Imagine A gets hacked. Then A can recover its data by approaching B and C. It will have to approach both B and C to recover the full data. Okay. This means that, very similar to the case with 2 Bitcoin miners, there are exactly 2 covers out there. Yeah. Now, what is different between these 2 is that A and B observe less in the case here in comparison to the case there. Yeah. So you have information segmentation here. Okay. And let me zoom into this case now and look at this more thoroughly. It is the special case for 3 banks. We have the case for a general number of banks in the paper. And it turns out that the case for 3 banks is already quite interesting. All right. We call this the case of double covers because every information is exactly observed by 2 entities. It's also a good model for the case where you think about transactions between 2 banks, A and B. Yeah, so customers of A transacting with customers of B is observed by both A and B. Customers of A transacting with customers of bank C is observed by A and C, but not B, right? So this is the idea of this particular example. Now, well, how would A protect its own data? Privately optimal. And what would B and C do? Well, what you see exactly is that the case for A, B, and C is symmetric, and therefore we are going to just concentrate on the case of A. Yeah. And now let's figure out, what is A's chance of its data being compromised? Well, A's data is compromised if A gets attacked and B or C. Yeah. So if A is attacked and B, A is going to lose access to this chunk of information. If A and C get attacked, this chunk of information is lost. Okay. And now you could say, well, it's a partial loss of data, but we just say a partial loss is equivalent to going out of business. All right. So that's the simplifying assumption. Okay. So therefore, what is A's probability of data loss? Well, this probability of data loss is A gets attacked. Yeah, and the attack probability depends on A's choice of data investment, of security investment. So A needs to be attacked and B or C. And now we have to subtract the probability here because the chance that all 3 entities get jointly attacked is included once in here and once in there. We have to subtract it once. All right. Okay. So A's profit is given by the function here. So it's the chance of not being compromised times the revenue it generates, less its investment in data security. And one very important insight that you see here is A's profit is going to depend on B's and C's choice of investment in data security. Yeah, and this is because if I get attacked, I hope that B or C is not attacked. Yeah, because then I can recover the data and I can still run revenue. Yeah, and if I don't run revenue, I go out of business. So A does depend on B and C. But also the other way around later on, it's important that A has to, or A is going to, in fact, A is going to fail to notice that its own investment data security will also have an impact on B and C. Yeah, of course, it goes the other way around. All right. So first order conditions, yeah, so pin down the optimal investment, A's optimal investment in data security, and we get a nice condition here that we can that you can solve. We can show that there is a unique private symmetric equilibrium where all entities invest the same amount in data security, and that level is characterized by this equation here. Okay, so this is the privately optimal solution, and it very much depends on what's the cost to I, what's the revenue it generates, but also what is the attack probability. Okay, question?
Yes. Hi. I was trying to wrap my head around how the differences is between the two banks case and three banks case, right? So in the two banks case, you also have this double covers, basically mutually covers. And the differences here is that the information from A's perspective, the information is going to be split between two other entities instead of one.
Yes,
but since we know in the three banks case, it's going to be a in the equilibrium, it will be symmetric. Then that means B's decision is the same as C. Then why can't we just consider them as the same entity? Then we go back to the two banks case, right?
Okay, very good. So good that you say that. They do not necessarily behave symmetrically. We just show there is one symmetric solution. There are also asymmetric solutions.
Okay. Sounds good.
And we are going to, we don't look at this case here so much, and rather at that case, because the structure here is more complicated, and we try to gain more insight into the case with N banks. Yeah, as you're generalizing this, having more and more entities. And this is essentially too simple to put it. Yeah. The segmentation here is important because you see how tricky the chance of data being compromised here already becomes. Yeah. And it turns out that for N banks, it's getting more and more tricky. And this is the case that we were really interested in, because we were thinking about transaction data. It's two entities operating with one another, and A's information set not be fully observed by a second entity, but rather by multiple entities that do not observe the same information. Yeah. Okay. So according to my watch, I have 10 minutes left, or 12. How much do I have left so that I know? 12 minutes? All right. Okay, then let me speed up a little bit. This is the symmetric private solution. Now, as I said, A forgets to internalize that its own investment in data security, of course, impacts B and C. The social planner takes this, incorporates this idea, yeah. And what's the social planner function? Well, the social planner maximizes joint profits of all entities. And here, the social planner internalizes how these different entities impact each other's profits indirectly by serving mutually as a backup, okay? Now, if you run through the first order conditions of the social planner, you get a different optimality condition, yeah, for the socially optimal solution, for the symmetric socially optimal solution. And one thing that you can easily show is in the private optimum, all entities underinvest relative to the social optimum. Okay, so all entities free ride on one another. Now, this is not surprising, but the question is, what can you do about that? Typically, you could think about, well, you can have a regulator that forces the entities to invest more, but how can you really observe whether this investment is really done in a way that it truly enhances data security. So it's very tricky to think about how would you optimally regulate here. And what Rod and I were thinking about is doing something alternative. We were thinking about what if a regulator provides a third layer of security, a third cover. Would this improve incentives by other institutions to increase their level of data security? So concrete, we were thinking about providing something like Fedwire, a central bank that observes all information out there. Yeah. So essentially you look at the case before, but now you have a central bank observing all data that is observed by each bank. And by introducing this third layer, a third cover. And the question that we're asking is this going to improve overall security, or is this going to backfire? Yeah, and because I have not so much time left, let me just say up front, sometimes it backfires and sometimes it improves things. The way we set up this particular case is we allowed the central bank to also walk away. And therefore, the setting here is going to nest the case as before. And yeah, it turns out that sometimes walking away gives you the highest level of overall security. Okay, so let me walk you through the details. So you have this third institution, Fedwire, providing a full ledger. At time one, so we're now adding one time period, essentially time stage 1, where Fedwire can set its own level of data security, CF. And that level of security, so that's the security level of the third layer, of the third redundancy. This is perfectly observed by all private entities. And now in stage 2, the private entities move and set their privately optimal level of security. Okay. Well, what does this do? Let's solve this backwards from stage 2. How is the third redundancy going to affect the profits of the bank A? Well, the likelihood of being compromised now changes, because for A having compromised data, A needs to be attacked, F needs to be attacked, and B or C. Okay, so that sounds great. A should be more secure. Now remember that we allow Fedwire to set an investment of 0. If you plug in 0 here, the Fedwire gets attacked for sure, and you see that the profit function reduces to the profit function in the previous setting. Okay, so there will be a new first order condition, and we get the following results. Okay, and so the result is as follows. There can be, so assume that Fedwire moves first, and let's fix that for a moment. And then there's a unique symmetric private equilibrium out there. And now sometimes this private equilibrium is interior. So sometimes all banks will provide an interior amount of data security. Sometimes it will be 0, and sometimes it will be infinite. Now, if these two conditions here are met, all entities will set an interior solution, which is characterized by this equation here. However, if the attack probability does not fall sufficiently fast for low levels of investment in data security, all institutions will set a 0 investment. Yeah. And last, if the attack probability is very variable in data security, then all institutions will set an infinite investment in data security. Okay. So, but this, yeah, and so Fedwire is now going to notice these different types of equilibria and will now decide at stage 1 what to do. Okay, so Fedwire is going to optimize, it's going to maximize joint profits, but it will also take into account that providing the Fedwire third redundancy is costly. Okay, so there's a first order condition for Fedwire, and this is a fairly complicated first order condition because depends in all kinds of ways on the choices by not only Fedwire, but also by the private banks. Now, one thing that you can very easily show is assume that you are in this interior equilibrium. Yeah, so Fedwire provides the third layer, and then all private institutions set an internal level of data security. Then whenever Fedwire marginally increases its level of security, the private companies will shirk and reduce their investment in data security. Okay, and so this provides a very interesting inequality, namely the following. Remember that in the case without Fedwire, we already saw that all banks privately underinvest compared to the social optimum. And the case of the private optimum is just the case where Fedwire sets a zero investment. Now, the result here tells you that if Fedwire provides positive investment, the private companies will even shirk more. Yeah, so the private solution with Fedwire is strictly below the private solution without Fedwire, is strictly below the socially optimal solution. Yeah, and so this is about individual levels of investment data security. So what will Fedwire do? What will the Fed do? Sorry. Okay, so I think two interesting examples about the corners. If Fedwire invests enough in the third redundancy, it's always possible to deter the corner equilibrium where all institutions invest infinite amounts. However, if the attack probability does not fall sufficiently fast for a small level of data security, then no investment choice by the Fed will deter the no investment equilibrium. Okay, and this essentially means that if you're in the case without Fedwire, and if the private institutions decide to not invest anything, then adding Fedwire will not help. They will continue to not invest anything. Okay. So what is the optimal solution to Fedwire? Because remember, we know for sure as the Fed provides the third layer, the private institutions will shirk. The question is, how fast do they shirk? Yeah, because providing the third layer is going to provide security. The shirking will lower security. So how quickly, how do we trade these two against one another? Okay, so let's assume that the speed at which the attack probability, declines times the attack probability goes to zero for a large investment in security. Then there are essentially three cases. If the attack probability does not fall fast enough for a small investment in security, yeah, then Fedwire optimally abstains and will not invest anything, which means the third layer is not provided. If the attack probability drops slowly but sufficiently fast, then implementing Fedwire will create value, even though the private institutions, they will not invest anything. Okay. And third, if we are in the case where the attack probability falls fast enough so that the private entities will invest in data security, then it's optimal to provide Fedwire as long as the investment in security by the private institutions is in fact small. Yeah. And what's the intuition behind the result here? Well, this has to do with the convexity of the attack probability. Remember, convex and decreasing means that the attack probability drops fastest if you invest a teeny tiny amount in data security. Now, technically, if these banks invest in data security and Fedwire starts investing, they will shirk. Yeah, so they will invest less. However, if their own investment is already small, they will not shirk too much. And that's because if they reduce it too much, the attack probability shoots up too fast. Okay, and so that's the idea. Okay, so I'm running out of time, therefore I'm only sketching our last result. The last question that we're asking ourselves was, so yeah, remember, so this here essentially answers the question, should Fedwire ever be provided? And the answer is sometimes. Yeah, so sometimes it's optimal to provide the third layer, sometimes not. Now the question is, will the provision of Fedwire ever attain the socially optimal solution? Or can it even exceed the socially optimal solution without FedWire? Okay, and initially, you might think that this is very easy to answer, but it turns out it's not so much because the information systems are so different. Remember, in the case with FedWire, you have 3 covers. In the case without FedWire, you have only 2 covers. Okay, so in the case with FedWire, total security exceeds the socially optimal security level without FedWire, if and only if this inequality here holds. Yeah, and okay, so to give you a couple of details about this inequality, you have here the socially optimal solution of entity A, and here the privately optimal solution of A in the case of FedWire. Here you have again the socially optimal solution, the privately optimal solution under given FedWire, and the FedWire solution. So this one equality should be, you should be able to verify whether this inequality holds or not. Unfortunately, it's not all of these equilibrium equations are easy to invert. Therefore, let me just walk you through a quick example, and then I'm going to conclude. So you cannot solve this so easily, unfortunately. Even the example cannot be solved easily. So let me show you the example. Let's assume you have an attack probability alpha of C, which is e to the minus C. Yeah, so this is our attack probability. Yeah, it's indeed, it's a number between 0 and 1. It's positive, decreasing, and convex with alpha of 0 equal to 1 and alpha of C going to 0 as investment in security goes to infinity. Now, for solving this inequality here, or for plugging in numbers, what do you have to solve? Well, the socially optimal solution is pinned down with this equation, and you already see that you can solve for CA, but it's a little bit more involved than usual. Likewise, the privately optimal solution in the FedWire case is pinned down by this equation. The change in equilibrium behavior of A due to an increase in FedWire's investment is given by this fraction here. And then finally, the optimal FedWire choice is characterized by this first order condition. Yeah, and so plugging in, you get this inequality here, which then you would need to verify depending on your solutions here. Okay, but we haven't done that yet. So this is what we're currently working on. Therefore, let me wrap up. Okay, so a known problem data security is that as you have more parties observing data, yeah, so if you have more redundancies, that gives the solution the illusion of safety. And now Dalia disagrees with me here, but I think as a first, initially you think as you have more backups, you think you're on the safer side, that you cannot, your data cannot get compromised if you have more backups and more backups, etc. But you're increasing the points of attack, and now you have to think about that. These different backups are protected not by the same entity, but by different entities. Yeah, so I protect my own data, and someone else can observe a share of my own data. Some other entities jointly observe exactly my data, but it's their job to protect that data, even though they observe the exact, even though I'm very interested in this data being protected because, you know, it serves as my backup, I don't have a direct influence on how other entities protect their data. Okay. So we provide an economic model of data security featuring redundancies, information segmentation, and free riding. Yeah, so economic incentives play a role here. How I protect my own data will have an impact on other entities because I might serve as their backup. If I get attacked, I can no longer serve as their backup. Okay, so redundancies cause free riding, and more redundancy can harm overall data security when all parties internalize the quantity of backups. Now, for finance, this is interesting because it's costly and risky to restructure payment infrastructure. Yeah, the provision of central bank digital currency, etc. And the idea of the paper is to contribute on how to do that and when not to. Thank you so much.